Welcome to Emphasis Added, a podcast by the Houston Law Review about legal issues, prominent lawyers, and the study and practice of law. I'm Matt Chelf.
And I'm Brock Jones. We're your hosts, and thanks for joining us.
We're joined here today in our final episode of Season 4 by Martin Thomas, the founder of the law offices of Martin Thomas PLLC, to lay out a roadmap for venturing out on your own and hanging your own shingle.
We'll also talk about the rapidly developing area of AI in the law. Martin graduated from South Texas College of Law here in Houston. He primarily handles breach of contract and business litigation, but also deals with consumer protection cases and non-compete agreements.
But before we dive too deeply here, I wanted to take the opportunity to address the new presence on our show today. Harrison Little is one of our incoming 3L Houston Law Review podcast editors for Season 5, and will soon take over the reins with his co-host, Jake Guarino. Jake was introduced to the show last episode, where he appeared as co-host alongside Brock, and I wanted to give Harrison a brief moment here to introduce himself before we get filming.
Thanks, Matt. So like Matt said, my name's Harrison Little. I'm a rising 3L here at the University of Houston Law Center. I'm super excited to be taking over the reins of Emphasis Added next season with my co-host, Jake Guarino. We're looking at releasing our first episode sometime in late May or early June, so be sure to keep your eyes out for that. As far as my legal interests go, I'm interested in both corporate and finance work, and this summer I'll be a summer associate at Latham & Watkins here in Houston, so I'm just super excited to be here.
And we're super happy to have you, Harrison. And now over to you, Martin. So thanks for joining us today. How's business?
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to be here, and thank you for having me on the show. Business is going well. It's absolutely a whirlwind. It's definitely not what I thought it was going to be when I first started, but very happy to be doing it.
Awesome. So as we mentioned in your intro, you are off on your own, the law offices of Martin Thomas. You're really doing it, So pretty young guy. The American Bar Association's 2022 profile of the legal profession reports that 10 months after graduation, less than 1% of law school graduates are taking the solo route. So soon after graduation, it is pretty rare to be out making your own business. Surely most graduating law students wouldn't even kind of really know where to begin on that path. And so our intention with this episode is to maybe shine some light on how to get started on your own. For you, what were your primary reasons for wanting to start your own practice?
Yeah, there were some things that my supervising attorneys had asked me to do that, frankly, I just wasn't comfortable with. Different moments where I had to decide, was I going to compromise my morals or not? And I chose not to compromise my morals and what I believed. And that left me without a job at times. And so there was a point when I looked at my resume and said, all right, 3 law firms in 1 year. No one's going to hire me now, and rightly so. So let's just go ahead and get started. And I'm so glad I did. Haven't looked back. It has been the best decision that I've made with my career.
And so what kind of experience did you get during law school that helped prepare you to venture out on your own?
Yeah, so there's definitely a mixed feeling in terms of, did law school prepare me for being in the practice of law or not? There's a lot of things law school can't even begin to help you with. But there's plenty of things that I did get a lot of good experience from. One of the best things I had was a mediation class. Most cases in litigation end up in mediation at some point or another, whether that because the judge ordered it or because it's actually something that you agree with your client is the best thing for the case. With that, most cases do settle at mediation. So understanding the process, what's going on in the mediator's head, and all the different possible outcomes was very, very beneficial. So I enjoyed that a lot. That was very helpful. I also had several internships in law school that were very helpful. I found that the smaller the firm you intern at, the more practical experience you'll get. The large firms, they have a lot to offer in terms of resume and prestige, but they're going to save a lot of the work for the associates that they already have. The smaller firms need the help, and because they need the help, they'll give it to an intern. And so you get a lot of chances to do things. When I was an intern, I had the chance to help with a trial. I basically was the AV person for the attorney I was working for, but I sat with her for 2 different trials that summer, watched the whole thing beginning to end, and that was very, very valuable. I also had a chance to write a dispositive motion that in large part was adopted by the attorney I was writing it under, and they submitted it with not a whole lot of changes to what I wrote. And you can only really do that at the smaller firms. And so I'm a bit of an advocate for that because I think you get a whole lot more practical experience.
Yeah. Did you take a trial procedure or a trial advocacy class in law school? And do you feel like that was a similar experience, or it was totally different than actually getting that small firm internship experience?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I did take a trial advocacy course, and it was very fun, and it allowed me to use some of those things I learned in evidence, how to object and that sort of thing. But the big thing that I think that course can't teach you, because they wouldn't be able to, is how to build a case. And that is one of the big fundamentals that I don't think you can get without, I don't think you can get that in law school necessarily. I thought doing a trial course would help me more than it did. The true measure of a case is how well you're able to build the case. What evidence can you collect? Too many lawyers just rely on whatever documents their clients give them, and they try to get the rest in discovery from the opposing party. But there are several other parties, or non-parties rather, that you can go to collect that evidence. And just learning to actually collect that, build the case, find the evidence wherever it may be, is not something they can teach you in a trial advocacy course, because the only way they can teach you the trial advocacy course is to just give you the evidence and say, this is what you have to work with. And so no one really teaches you how to build your case.
That makes sense.
Gotcha. And so what do you see as the biggest differences between your average day today and when you were working in the firm setting?
Yeah, the biggest difference is how much time I spend practicing law. It's probably 30 to 40% of my day is actually practicing law. Most of what I'm doing is running a business. As the head honcho, the principal attorney at my firm, most of my time is spent handling different issues that arise, handling marketing, a little bit of accounting, billing, random questions here and there, training my staff, dealing with sales calls because everyone wants your money. All the different things that go with running a business take up a whole lot more of my time than actually practicing law does.
It's got to be a bit disorienting having to transition to do all this managerial work once you make that step towards solo practice. I'd have to imagine that's a tough transition.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because you don't know what you don't know. And there's so many different roadblocks and hurdles that just spring up because, we're not taught in law school how to run a business. This is not a business school. It's a law school. We're taught how to practice law to some extent. And so trying to just, get an EIN, pay the comptroller your different taxes. Employment tax is its own separate headache that has to be paid every 2 weeks. And learning all of these different things that you have to do, that no one's going to tell you about, you just walk into it.
Mm-hmm. If only you could have listened to this particular episode of the podcast before you started in some weird inception way where we could go back in time and you could get this advice before you started. So it sounds like, at least on the business perspective, everything didn't necessarily click right off the bat, and how could it, right?
Definitely.
But hopefully we can shine some light on what you just alluded to, some things that you know now that you wish you knew before you got started on your own, and we can help some future folks on their way.
Yeah, so the most important thing that I can say is that building your business is about building systems. Systems are how you get things done consistently and efficiently. If you're just trying to hack at it, that's all you're ever going to do. And so what do I mean by systems? I'm talking about a process of doing things over and over. And so you're starting off. You get your first phone number so that people can call you when they're ready to hire an attorney. How do you answer the phone? You should have a consistent way that you do it every time. So for me, it's Law Office of Martin Thomas, this is Martin. For each of my staff now, they have the same thing. They follow the system. Law Office of Martin Thomas, this is Anna, or whomever it is. And building a bunch of different systems that you consistently do to make sure that you have consistent results. And the best way to build these systems is to write them down. And when you're a solo and you're just starting off your firm, that's going to feel a little silly. But then it's already in place so that when you hire your first staff, you say, here are the systems, follow them. And then there's no real room for error, there's no excuses. You said this is the system, follow it. And you have tested it enough times that you know this is a proven recipe for success. That's the key to scaling as well, is you need to have these systems if you're going to delegate anything and trust that it will get done.
So as far as systems go, I can hear you talking about repeatability and scaling, ability to grow it up and have other folks under you follow the same processes. But when I think of systems, I'm also thinking about, like, is everything inside of a Microsoft Office? Is everything inside of QuickBooks? Like, how did you decide on what kind of systems as far as that regard to go with?
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different software packages that an attorney or law firm can use, and I think it's very important to find ones that click well together. While you can have a bunch of different pieces that each individually work, the more systems in terms of software that you have that talk to each other, the easier your life is going to be. So I started out on like the Gmail suite, doing the Google suite, and I ultimately ended up switching to the Microsoft box because it works better with my client management software. So I use Leap, which they're not paying me to say this, just a fan. It's great software. It's a little pricey, but it's absolutely worth it for document automation. I'm not trying to plug them. But it combines well with the Microsoft suite, and I wasn't able to find a lot of that in Gmail. Now, with that, there are plenty of things that work very well with the Google suite. So it's about finding the software that all kind of talks to each other. In my experience, what I found is the Google suite of business software will be the first to adopt new programs and things that come out. Microsoft is much slower, but Microsoft is also much more robust. So if you are looking for innovation, you should probably have your business on the Google suite. If you are looking for consistency, you should probably have it on the Microsoft. Again, not a plug by any means, just my opinion. You also absolutely have to have accounting software. If you're going to run a business, I understand we are not accountants, or at least most of us aren't. There may be the tax lawyer out there. You need to find a way to do it. The easiest way is probably QuickBooks. Take the time to learn it. It's not something you can mess around with. You cannot mess up a client's trust account. That's disbarment.
Yep.
So learn at least some level of accounting. Learn QuickBooks. Take that part very seriously.
Yeah. So besides starting on Google and transitioning to Microsoft softwares, what do you think you would do differently if you were to be getting started all over again?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I didn't take as seriously in the beginning that is the lifeblood of your business is marketing. And that may sound a little silly, but like, I wasn't a business major. That wasn't intuitive to me. Marketing is your lifeblood. I spent a lot of money in different places where I found kind of a middling ROI, or return on investment. Easily, my best ROI beginning is Google Ads. Google Ads brought people into my, I'm not going to say in my door because we're very digital these days, but onto my phone line within a day. And I was getting new cases the day after I had signed up and started putting money into Google Ads. Whereas trying to get like your SEO or different directory listings, that can take you a whole lot longer. They say that SEO can take up to a year. You have to have your website in place with good optimization for a year before you'll really start to see organic leads. When you're beginning a law firm, you don't have a year to wait. So I was very happy with Google Ads, and there's a bunch of other different services that offer listings and directories. But you need to find a way to get people to you quickly. Marketing is very, very, very important.
That segment was also not an ad, but the podcast is open to investment. So Google, hit us up.
So Now knowing what you know about the accounting side and the marketing side and things like that, as far as the practice of law goes, what would you do differently now?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely very different being the sole person responsible for these different clients and cases, whereas as an associate, if something isn't going your way, you can kind of run that up the flagpole, and your boss can say, hey, I'm not going to let you do that. And your boss kind of takes the heat, and you can say to your clients, like, oh, my hands are tied. When it's just on you and a client starts asking you for favors, and there's no one to be like, oh, that's not our firm policy. You make the firm policy. And so it's a lot harder to say no to those different like little favors that they ask you to do, that those things that go beyond the scope of your agreement or your representation. I would have been, if I were to do it again, I'd do a lot less favors for clients, and I'd be much, I don't want to say meaner about it, but more strict. Say, no, that is beyond the scope of my representation. If you'd like me to include that, we can talk about it, but that's going to be a longer conversation. The other thing is with clients, I'd be much, much more strict with my deadlines. Some clients, you can say, hey, I need this a week before you actually need it, and they're still going to get it to you 2 weeks after you need it. The only way that you can get your clients to get you the stuff you need is you have to be very, very strict with them. And that's not just with discovery, that's with payment. And so retainers are important, but when that retainer runs out and they're like, oh, times are hard, it's like, times are hard for me too. Like, you paying your retainer is what puts food on my table. So there's a lot of clients who will take advantage of you if you're nice, and you have to be strict. You can't be nice all the time. It's a weird and difficult balance. It's very hard to say no to someone who has fallen on hard times and needs legal help.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have to take care of yourself as well. By way of analogy, paramedics are taught that when they have to go save someone in a situation, you prioritize yourself, because a dead rescuer can't save anyone, and if you go down, now we have to send someone else to get you and the person who was hurt. It's kind of the same thing for lawyers. While yes, our ethical duty is to put our clients first, if you go down, you can't help them at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. I imagine, I think I relate to how difficult that balance is with clients, especially when you're the only one. So I don't know it from a practicing law perspective, obviously, but in my real estate career, it's just so hard when you are it's just you, right? And your business is just your relationships. And you're supposed to meet somebody and they no-show you, and they no-show you again, and they no-show you a third time. It's like, at what point are we not doing this? Because it's like, you want that client, you want that engagement, you understand their excuse was legitimate, but you also have time and other clients, right? So that was a really, really difficult for me in my previous career learning curve. And I imagine for hanging your own shingle solo practice attorneys, it's the same way. So in hindsight, it seems like you've learned a lot in your time as a solo practitioner.
Made a lot of mistakes.
You wouldn't go straight into private practice out of law school, you think?
No, not straight out of law school. I really think that anyone who does that, that's going to be a little bit of a mistake. I'd say the caveat would be, you can do it if you have a good mentor who is willing to basically be your boss, kind of, while you're figuring it out. There are so many things that you just don't know that you don't know. And with the internet, you're able to ask for a whole lot more help than you used to be able to, but only if you know the things to look up, the things to ask for help for. For example, a client's hired you, you go through the issue spotting, you decide the client has a case, you sign them up. Okay, cool, you've written the petition. Now what? Maybe you've used Texas e-file, maybe you haven't. But if you haven't, how would you know how to actually file the case? After you file it, it gets accepted. Okay, cool, it's accepted. Matt, you're a 3L. What happens now?
Don't ask me. Yeah, I take the 8-minute rule and I look it up, and then after 8 minutes I go to ask somebody. But if I don't have anybody to ask because I'm in your shoes, I don't know what I'd do, right?
Right. And so, you do things like, so you get the petition back, next step is to serve it, but then how do you serve it? You can go to the rules and it can tell you like, oh, the attorney or the party is not allowed to serve it. It has to be someone over the age of 18 who's authorized in the state of Texas, or something like that. I don't know the verbatim rule. Do you just find your friends? So finding these different processes and learning best practices on how to do them rather than just hacking through it is invaluable. And so I think spending at least 6 months to a year at another firm, or at least long enough that you've seen a case from beginning to end, so these are the things I can expect. These are at least the questions I should have through the process, I think is very important before you start your own practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sounds like a steep learning curve.
It is a very steep learning curve coming from, just past the bar to I feel comfortable representing someone in court.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing the wonderful advice there. And I think we'll pivot into a new fascinating topic.
For sure. So pivoting to our next discussion, something that we're really excited to talk about today is the rise of artificial intelligence and how that relates to the legal field. We've seen in just the last few months, seemingly, the rise of tools like ChatGPT that are becoming increasingly advanced and advanced enough to pass law school exams and even the bar at this point. But it's almost a little scary to see how quickly AI is growing right now. So there are tools out there that can create art from specific prompts and answer complex questions. What are the legal-focused AI tools capable of doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following the AI renaissance very closely. We're 5-6 months into it at this point. It's been definitely a whirlwind of what it is we're able to accomplish. In terms of the legal tools, there aren't a ton of legal-specific AIs right now. There certainly will be. The ones that I've seen are like Co-Counsel from Case Text. Lexis has one that will analyze your briefs and shepherdize the different documents. And they are all okay. The Co-Counsel one from Case Text does a decent job looking up case law. It takes longer than I thought it would to do it. Overall, I just wasn't very impressed with it. It's okay, but the technology is so very, very new. I'm sure that it will be infinitely better by the time this podcast even has been released.
That's the truth.
OpenAI's GPT-4 is probably the best tool right now for editing, and that's just kind of anything. So any writing that you do, GPT-4 is probably the best for it. You're able to feed it a few paragraphs of a demand letter or a petition and say, make this paragraph stronger, or, change all my verbs from passive to active. Those sorts of things that are very helpful for speeding up the editing process where, maybe it's a very late night, you're working on this petition, you just need to get it filed, and you have too much brain fog to do it yourself. It's very helpful for that. Now, as a quick side note with OpenAI software, I did say GPT-4 as opposed to ChatGPT. This is a very important thing for the attorneys who haven't realized this yet, who may be already using ChatGPT. You cannot put client data into ChatGPT. If you are using their web browser-based site, chat.openai.com or whatever it is, they have made it very clear that they are using your inputs and responses for training data. That is a breach of your obligation to keep your client's information confidential. Now, if you use GPT-4, which is through their API, so you have a program that makes an API call as opposed to the browser-based chat GPT session, that OpenAI has said we don't collect any data, it's done. So that does keep client information confidential, whereas ChatGPT does not. So do not put client information in ChatGPT.
Big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, huge lesson. And then I've also heard about some tools, maybe I got an Instagram ad or something that Microsoft is doing, and you mentioned, you think Google is normally more on the forefront of the innovation side of things, but that Office is getting some new tools, Copilot or something like that. Have you heard anything
Yeah.
about that one? I'm not as familiar as I want to be, but
Microsoft Copilot is a tool that I think is very interesting. I haven't got a chance to use it yet. I'm still on the wait list. But from what I've read about it so far, I think that is the one that will really change things like the legal field. Mostly because it's going to integrate so easily into the apps that we already use. So Microsoft Word, OneDrive, Excel, Outlook. And so that you could be able to say to Copilot something like, hey, in my OneDrive, look at this folder that contains the evidence for this case, and these are my emails with opposing or a counsel, here in my exchange. Go on to MS Word and write me a motion to compel discovery based on the things that opposing counsel hasn't sent me yet that we've argued about in these emails. And that's all the prompt that it will need, and it will go find the information, allegedly, and it will write the motion. Now, my understanding is that's the goal for where they hope to put Copilot. And from what we've seen so far, we are not far off from that technology being a reality, probably end of the year.
wow.
But that's very, very close.
That's exciting. And I would assume that software like that, if that's the claim of what it could do, would still need to maintain the strictly internal, like, client confidentiality aspect.
Yeah. So Microsoft has said several times that when it comes to the way Copilot's going to use, your data and software, is that it won't be used for training because they understand that, they're an enterprise-facing company. No company wants their stuff being used. And so that's been a very important selling point for Microsoft when they're talking about Copilot.
That's awesome. So one of the primary concerns with the rapid development of AI for many people is job security. Change, I think, always brings these kind of fears, right? Industrial Revolution probably brought some of those kinds of fears. Y2K brought some of those kinds of fears. But when tools like, LegalZoom first became available, many people talked about how that would spell the death of many attorneys' careers. Do you think it's possible, if you're saying that a tool like Copilot could draft a motion for you, that an AI attorney could pose threats to the work that some attorneys do?
No, I mean, I should never speak in absolutes, but I would be very, very surprised if AI starts replacing attorneys. Now, I will say attorneys who use AI will leave attorneys who don't use AI in the dust, and it won't be close. The ability to have Copilot, write that motion for you, that motion's not ready to file. There's almost no scenario where it is. That will get you 60% of the way there, if you're lucky, if it does a really good job. You still have to go back through, make sure it's all right, and even as AI gets better and better and better, AI is not licensed to practice law. Like, ultimately, it's your license, and if you're just trusting AI to handle that for you, I think you're rearing for a malpractice suit.
Absolutely. Okay. Tools, not replacements,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
And then the best way, I mean, I'll let you be the expert, but what are the best ways then for attorneys to leverage those tools to come out ahead? You said they'll leave them in the dust. Is it just from an efficiency perspective?
It's very largely an efficiency standpoint, absolutely. Tools like, the GPTs out there, so all these LLMs, which is large language models, which is what ChatGPT, that's the type of AI it is. Those will drive the cost of litigation way down. Because if I only need 10 minutes to write this motion that used to take me 45 to an hour, it's going to get a lot cheaper to do a lot more cases. And so attorneys are going to become much, much more efficient, and hopefully it actually makes things like taking on cases that, would have been prohibitive for a client because it was going to be too expensive for them to do. More people will hopefully have access to justice this way.
So with these tools, and we've talked about malpractice violations, if you were to just submit a draft that a GPT wrote for you, are there any other ethical implications that you see to using them inside of a legal practice?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about a little bit ago, ChatGPT will take your client data if you put it in there, whereas if you use the OpenAI's API, it will not. So you have to read the terms and conditions. each different AI will have its own terms and conditions. Some of them will use your data, some of them will not. And you have to check, because it is our obligation to keep client information safe.
Absolutely.
You need to verify everything that the AI does as well. So AI is not an attorney. Like I kind of joked earlier, it's not licensed to practice law. If you are putting your name on something that you haven't looked at, that's unethical. Like, you need to be doing the work. And at least the way the AI tools right now, they are often close, but no cigar. So many of the things they say, you're like almost there, just not quite. So you can't just be letting it do that. It's a tool. It is not a replacement for us. It is something that will help save you time. Maybe it will get your motion 60% of the way there, if you're lucky. And it, again, saves time, but it's not a replacement. You can't rely on it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It's just such a rapidly developing thing. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see where they go. Like you said, we'll probably publish this 2 weeks from recording, and who knows what we've got in 2 weeks, right? Come Christmas, it'll be an entirely different story. So
Absolutely. So the AI renaissance has been going on for about 6 months, and the people who were inspired by it in the first 2 months have now spent 4 months hard at work trying to bring to market whatever thing they were inspired by when ChatGPT 3 first came out. And so those things are going to come to market in the next 6 months, and we are going to see a very rapidly changing world. The thing that you may or may not have seen is AutoGPT. So the idea is that it's an LLM, a large language model, that you submit, say, hey, this is my abstract idea. Write a book about how to start a new baseball team in Los Angeles, something, I don't know. And the first thing it does is it will send to a ChatGPT agent or something like that, create a task list of everything I would need to do to accomplish this task. And then it will create a bunch of subroutines of, okay, now do this, now do this, now do this. And you can give these AIs very abstract tasks, and they will more or less figure it out. Now, those are even more in their infancy than ChatGPT is. I've played around with those a little bit. They get it right about 10% of the time, but people are hard at work at getting those ready to go. Those will be in the market, I would boldly say, before the end of the year, where you can just tell AI, build me this video game, and it will.
that's wild. That's wild. Okay, AI, can you solve the housing crisis?
I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes part of our legislative process in the future is, write this bill that will actually solve these problems.
Wild. Well, that is awesome. You'll have to keep us appraised in the future. This could be the recurring last episode of each season is where are we at in the AI market with Martin Thomas. Because I'm sure we'll be in a totally different place a year from now than we are right now. But thank you very much for sharing that. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, it's awesome to have you here today, Martin. Thanks for taking the time to share your insights with us and our audience. I'm sure that there are future attorneys out there who really benefited from the tips you gave today. And on a similar note, are you hiring right now?
Yeah, every time my task list gets a little too big for me to handle on my own, I add someone else to my team. So, always looking for good young talent who wants to learn how to litigate.
Wonderful. Well, in that case, we will put your information in the episode notes. And on that note, thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we totally wrap up, since this is my final episode hosting Emphasis Added, I want to thank you all for tuning in this season. Harrison and Jake as well are well equipped to take over the podcast and bring it to new heights. Brock and I were honored to be your hosts for season 4, and we're excited to see the show take a new direction. So for the final time, I'm Matt Chelf, signing off.
Thanks for listening. Emphasis Added is a podcast by the Houston Law Review. If you like what you saw, check us out on YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
Follow us on Instagram at EmphasisAddedPod, and check out the Law Review at HoustonLawReview.org.